All right, today we're going to take a close look at three of the most misunderstood and confused words in the entire human language. And those three words are love, compassion, and forgiveness. Seriously, there's no three words that I know of that people use like there's just one definition for all these things, and yet everyone often means something completely different, right? And there's several reasons why I think these words can be especially confused and misunderstood, and I'll share all those. And I want to start with love first, okay? And I want to start by asking this question of why is love so important? Why are we so obsessed with love? Why is almost every single rock song and pop song about love, right? If you just look at the history of top 100 Billboard songs, they're almost all about love. Usually, specifically romantic love, but also, sometimes love between, a father and mother and a child, or sometimes about just like peace, love, like we need to be loving each other, everybody, right? Why are we so obsessed with love? And I think there's a little clarity around that question if we do a little thought experiment. And so the thought experiment is, let's kind of imagine, this might be scary, but imagine you're living the last 10 minutes of your life. Right? You're just right there. It could be any setting. Don't immediately go to a hospital because no one wants to, right? But just you live in the last minutes left. Could be anywhere. It could be just a happy place. And you ask yourself the question, what would matter most? What matters most right now? And they've done studies on this, and for most people, the answer to the question, does anyone want to say? Anyone want to guess? What's that? Yeah, like who's there? Who's surrounding them, right? And how well did they take care of each other, right? In other words, how well did they love each other? I like to say this thing, which is that human beings are really just clouds of space dust who are given 100 years to love, right? That's, really what we are. What does that translate to? Well, we all came from stars, right? We all are the stuff that we're made of, regardless of whatever your religious beliefs are, the stuff that, came from the earth that we ate, that made us into human beings, all was once in a star cooking at some point, which is a crazy thought, right? Because that star then at some point exploded. There's a nebula, right? And then that gravity started pulling that stuff back together, made our sun, made the planets, etc. And then we've been eating the stuff from that planet ever since, and becoming who we are. So really, we are all a bunch of stardust who were given a shot, if we're lucky, 100 years. It's probably maybe a little overshoot, but 100 years to love, right? And when I say love, I mean to take care of each other, to meet each other's needs, right? So what's the problem? Why does it get so confusing? Why is this word so confused? For one, there's so many different kinds of love or definitions for love, right? So the Greeks alone had 8, and I just have 6 of those definitions here. The first is eros, which is, anyone know? Yep, the classic romantic love, right? There's philia, which is the love between friends, good friends, right? There's storge, which is the love between parents and children. I originally didn't know how to say storge, so I did one of those Google pronunciation things, and it's like storge. There's mania, which is that obsessive, clingy love that just takes over you, right? It's probably the worst kind of love. It actually doesn't feel very good. There's pragma, which is that deep love that stood the test of time. So, think of 2 grandparents who, were married for 50 years and just still love each other completely. It's definitely not eros anymore. It's not that young romantic love that they at one point experienced, but it's something deep and even more profound, right? And then there's agape, which is that kind of unconditional spiritual love. So for many religions, it's the love that you would imagine that God would feel for all people, right? Or it's the love that people claim to feel on mushroom trips. So the joke. Okay. Guessing most of you have not been on one. Okay, so all those 6 types of love that I just mentioned, what do they all have in common? As different as they are, they have one thing in common. They have to be reciprocated? Yeah, that is actually true. You're right. There's mania maybe not so much. They're all feelings, right? They're all these very intense, powerful feelings, right? But what do we know about feelings? They're impermanent, right? They come and they go. They seem to have a mind of their own. They're very conditional, right? And herein lies what I think is the biggest problem with this notion of love, right? With this concept of love and why it's so confused. If we think that love is a feeling, and we think to be good people, we need to show love to each other, and a special kind of love for my parents, special kind of love for my partner, special kind of love for my kid, special kind of love for my friends, right? What happens when that feeling comes and goes? There's a tension there. There's like, whoa, do I actually love this person? There's people, sometimes people in relationships who wake up one day and we're like, I don't love you today, and they think it's all over. They probably should break up and do something else. But even on a smaller level, there can be some inner conflict if we think we're to be good people, we want to love all the time. That's what we're supposed to do, it's what we're here to do. But we don't always feel it. We don't feel that gushy love feeling that we associate with love. That's complicated, right? And so for this reason, I would like to argue that there is something to that classic cliche that love is not a feeling, love is a verb. Have you guys heard this? No? Yeah. So there's there's like T-shirts and so people talk about it in couples therapy sometimes and in psychology. But I'm going to submit the argument that love, there are feelings that are classically associated with love, but the only unconditional love is an action, specifically a choice, some choice that we make. And that choice is a stance towards life, towards each other, that sounds something like this. I understand that you are human, like me, with very human needs. And I will do what I can to help meet your needs and make life wonderful for you. Right? So there's something so much more profound and universal about that, because that is a stance that we can have for each other. That's a stance that we can have in relationships with partners, with relationships with friends, with relationships with, teachers and students, right? Meeting each other's needs of I will respect my teacher's desire not to cheat, right? And I will understand that I should be totally fair to my students because they work their, butts off doing the actual best work they can. So I should be, I should give questions that are, close to what's on the study guide or close to what's in the homework, right? So this idea that love is a verb, right? This stands towards, I want to meet your needs, meet each other's needs, and make life wonderful for each other. It's unconditional. It's something you can do no matter how you feel because it's a choice. Okay? And that creates a little bit less conflict. It doesn't mean you need to be perfect at it. None of us are. but at least it's something that you can practice regardless of what you're feeling that particular day. So I'm going to say it one more time. I understand that you are human like me with very human needs, so I will do what I can to meet your needs and make life wonderful for you. Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay. So the cool thing about this definition is it's just as nourishing for us as it is for the people that's receiving our love, right? Because to love is a very strong human need. We talked about contribution being one of the biggest human needs last week, right? So loving is contributing to somebody else's well-being, right? Which is so powerful. Most of you know this feeling, right? Of like surprising someone, just doing a random act of kindness, seeing them light up, and it feels good, right? So the beautiful thing about this definition is it's so harmonious and mutual, right? Kind of like what you said, it's like very reciprocal. And so you all might be wondering this question, right? This is a class about mindfulness. What does this have to do with mindfulness, right? And so to that question, I would say, well, what are the biggest barriers that we have to loving in this way, right? To treating love as a verb, as a choice that I will try to meet your needs and make life as wonderful as possible for you. It's a real question. Yeah. What do you guys think? What are some of the barriers to that? Overthinking? All right, you're playing right into my hands. Yeah.
Our own anxiety towards certain things.
Yeah.
Perhaps our own traumas that are not healed.
Yeah.
That we don't realize, and then we reflect on someone else.
Yeah.
Or it reflects on our decisions and how we treat other people.
Couldn't have said it better. We should try to trade positions right now. Right? Yeah, totally. All those things. So thinking, right? Our thoughts, our judgments about other people, our emotions, the intense emotions we could be feeling, anxiety, and past traumas in our histories, right? And what have if there's anything we've learned so far about mindfulness, is that it's about becoming aware of all of those things, right? And living in a more harmonious way with them, right? Developing this new relationship with our thinking, with our emotions, and with our pasts, right? So, for example, you might have, these are very general judgments, but you might be, oh, that person doesn't deserve my love, right? Or that group of people over there doesn't deserve my love. Or they hurt me too much to love, right? Or, oh, those people are too far away to love, right? All of these, again, are just little thoughts that come and go, and our brain secretes them, and we have this choice, like we have with any thought. Like we could buy it, we could believe it, we could let it influence our behavior, or we could, like a little laser, just zip, zip, zap, zip, zip, zap these thoughts as we notice them, and then make this decision that we're going to choose to act in a way that's in line with the things we care about, which often is loving each other. So, in a very real way, we could think that the mindfulness part of this practice is posing this question: what thoughts and beliefs are keeping me from loving the way that I want to love? Okay? And then I know I sound so wild-eyed, naive, right? Like, oh, right, I'm trying to make this sound so easy. It is the hardest thing in the world. Let's be real, right? Let's be real. It's when we're hurt, when we are really hurt, it is really, really hard to love. It's really hard to meet other people's needs, right? And quite honestly, I want to be very clear and say, like, you know, the act of love does not mean taking someone else's abuse, right? So I mean, love needs to be just as directed towards yourself. And if, like, by engaging in meeting somebody's needs, you know you're opening yourself up to abuse because there's been a history of abuse in some sort of way, from mild to severe, it's okay to say, no, I'm choosing loving myself, meeting my own needs over your needs right now. That's fine. Like, we can hold those two realities at the same time, right? My point in sharing all this is that it makes it just a little bit easier to clarify what we really mean by taking care of each other, by loving each other, when we see it as we have this goal, this ideal, even if we don't always meet it, this ideal of meeting each other's needs in life and trying to make life wonderful for each other. So all of these words today, these words of love, compassion, and forgiveness, they all hold inside them these little traps. And often they're these little kind of weird ideas we get from society that aren't quite right, and we just, like, we can what if, and we can get stuck on these little traps, and I want to make sure that I clarify them. So after I discuss each of these three terms, I'm going to talk about the traps. So the love traps. Mentioned this already, but too often love doesn't include ourselves, right? We forget that we are just as deserving of meeting our own needs as anything else. In fact, it's kind of a prerequisite, right? I used to think it was like the silliest thing in the world when people were like, oh yeah, you can't love other people unless you love yourself. And I was like, whatever, what? No, I could totally love other people. Like, loving myself is hard, but loving other people is really easy. No. How can you really meet other people's needs if your own needs aren't met, right? If you're upset and hurt and exhausted, right? That makes it very, very hard to actually tend to other people in the way that, we hope to be able to tend to other people. The second one is very close and very related, and maybe you'll see some of this in yourself or see some of this in people you know, and it's too often our self-worth is tied to our ability to show love, right? So many of us give and give and give and give and give because we think underneath the giving there's nothing there to really like, right? Totally been guilty of this at times in my life, and this is a bummer because first it's not treating like the root cause, right? Like there's a root issue there, which is you've got to take a moment to check, like why don't I think I'm worth anything? What's going on there? What am I believing? Right? What thought have I been thinking over and over again that makes me think that I need to constantly be giving to somebody in order to feel like I'm deserving, like I deserve their love. The other tricky thing about it is, and you guys probably know this and probably felt it, you can sniff it out. People sniff it out when there's somebody who's constantly giving and serving and giving and serving because they don't really love themselves or feel like they're worth anything underneath. Have you guys ever experienced that? Yeah. And that's just very heartbreaking for the person giving the love, because if someone's like, no, I don't think this is coming from the right place, then it's even more heartbreaking because you're like, this is the only thing that I have to give, and you're even rejecting that, right? So, yeah, explore that. Like, if you notice yourself giving because it seems like, why would they like me if I didn't, right? Explore that feeling. Like, what's behind that? All right, the other trap. Often, if we don't feel love, we feel guilty. Okay, again, what's the problem here? We're using the definition of love as a feeling instead of as a verb, right? And that makes us feel guilty, right? Of course you're not always gonna feel love. There's nothing that we always feel all the time, right? So don't fall in this trap of thinking that you're somehow a bad person or not holy if you aren't feeling love all the time. Even for people that you say, I love you every day, right? This next one is a big one. People get trapped on this feeling, this belief that love is weak, right? That I'm a weak responding out of love is somehow a weakness, or that you're going to get taken advantage of or something. And so I want to argue that love is actually one of the strongest weapons we have in this entire world. And I have proof, I have evidence. Let's just take one example of Gandhi, who used this idea of radical love and nonviolence to free 600 million people, 600 million Indians, under the dominance of the strongest empire in the entire world, right? That's amazing, right? That's like there's no bullets fired, no war, no nothing, just love and nonviolence. And at some point, if somebody decides, I am not going to follow your unjust laws, but I will not hurt you because I love you and I see your dignity as a human being, at some point people are going to be like, all right, I can't. All right, you're right. I'm giving up, right? Or the rest of the world gets so inflamed and passionate that they're like, this love, like we connect with that much more than we connect with bullets. Again, I don't want to be naive. There's times in the world where there has to be defense and protection, protecting each other, or that going by this results in a lot of loss and pain. But we have an example here of a man who figured out how to use love to free 600 million people. And I also want to share something that Martin Luther King wrote while he was in prison for not following a law that he thought was an unjust law. He wrote, "To our most bitter opponents we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. We cannot in all good conscience obey your unjust laws, but throw us in jail, and we shall still love you. Bomb our homes, and threaten our children." It's hard to read this. "And we shall still love you. Be assured that we will wear you down by your capacity to suffer. One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves. We shall so appeal to your heart that we shall win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory." Right? I dare you to find weakness in that statement. Right? So, to end this, when people say that love is weak, I think they usually mean this idea of number 2 here, when your self-worth is tied to love. You're only loving because you don't. But if you're loving because you truly believe how much value you have, there's nothing more powerful than that. Okay, that's love. Thanks, Anna. Compassion. How is this word compassion different from love? So I'm going to define compassion as that softening in the heart that happens when we understand that others have the capacity to suffer like we do, and we make an effort to understand the root causes of their suffering and the behavior that maybe causes other people to suffer. Okay, so I'm going to say this again. Compassion is that softening of the heart that happens when we understand that, like us, other people have the capacity to suffer. And we make this effort to understand the root causes of another person's behavior. Okay? So, I'll give you an easy version and a hard version. Sometimes feeling compassion is very easy. For example, one thing that every time I hear it happen just wrecks me, and I'm just filled with that heart-softening feeling, is earthquakes where people get trapped under rubble. That, for some reason, sounds like the most horrible kind of suffering possible, probably because I'm claustrophobic, and so the idea of being claustrophobic while also not having food or water, not knowing if anyone's going to be able to rescue you, just is like, really taps into my heart. I'll give you an example of something much harder. A serial killer who robbed and then murdered 7 people over the course of a few years, right? Very hard to feel compassion for somebody in that situation, right? Somebody who perpetrated that and harmed other people. But I want to add some details to this person. This is a real person, by the way. I'll tell you who it is in the end. This person was once a 6-year-old girl whose dad was schizophrenic and committed suicide. Her mom had abandoned her when she was 4 years old. She was sexually assaulted by her grandfather, who was taking care of her. And she was a prostitute, and each of her victims was a client, right? Now, none of these facts make the action right? And I just want to be very clear, this is not what I'm saying, right? But knowing all that, knowing all those unmet needs, all those wounds, all that hurt that this person carried in life, there's a little softening of the heart that comes with it, right? And why is that a good thing? I argue that's always a good thing. It allows us to respond in ways that are much more effective and like promoting of each other, of living in a happy society. So for example, without compassion, our hard response is kill them, lock them up, put them in one cell for the rest of their lives, right? And yes, I think somebody like this should be separated from society, for sure, very important, right? But can we heal some of those wounds, right? Can we help rehabilitate somebody who has suffered like that through life and continues to make other people suffer because of that, those old wounds, right? And it also, compassion makes it a little bit less painful for us when somebody does something to us that hurts, right? If we understand the wounds that led to somebody's action, somebody's transgression, somebody's mistake, it's a little, just not a lot, but it's a little bit softer in there, you know? So this person, does anyone know what it says? Eileen Wuornos, serial killer? No, okay. Anyways, Google it if you want. They made a movie about her a few years back.
Is it Monster?
Movie Monster.
Mm-hmm. I know her.
Yeah. You're so tuned in with movies and TV shows. I'm so very impressed. Eileen Wuornos. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome movie if anyone checks it out. Monster is the name of the movie. Yeah. Okay. So practicing compassion can be very, very difficult. I used to have a really big crush on the Dalai Lama. I still do, but I used to really study him a lot. And his whole thing is all about compassion. Compassion. It's the most important thing in the world, right? And I remember these moments where I would feel like legitimately guilty because he'd say, practice compassion to your enemies, practice compassion to your enemies. It was so hard, I wasn't feeling it. And I felt this conflict, this guilt, like I must not be cut out for living a holy life, right? And it took a long time to realize that, like love, compassion also isn't just a feeling. Yes, there is this feeling, the softening of the heart that comes with it usually, but it's also this choice that I am going to make the effort to understand what wounds, what beliefs, what crappy thinking led to somebody's mistake, somebody's transgression. Okay? And then often when you do that, when you make that effort, a lot of times that the feeling of compassion, the feeling part just kind of comes up naturally. I also want to emphasize that self-love is just as important as loving others. Self-compassion is extremely important, right? We are so hard on ourselves sometimes, whether it's making some little mistake, not getting the grade we want, procrastinating, not studying hard enough, saying something we regret. It's so easy to just beat ourselves up. But what if we just took a moment and said, all right, what really caused that? What's going on the surface? What unmet needs are there? What am I believing that led to me doing that? Right? If I was, said something mean to someone that I love, was I hurt? Was I believing something about what they were thinking about me? Right? And there's usually almost always an answer there, right? And the great thing about that is if you're just ganging up on yourself for some mistake that you made, you think that you're punishing yourself so that you'll never make the mistake again. But you've never addressed or dealt with the underlying thing that caused you to make the mistake in the first place, right? So when you gang up on yourself, you are more likely to make the mistake because you feel like crap, right? You don't feel good about yourself. You have low self-worth, and you haven't actually taken the time to ask, why did I actually do that thing, right? So self-compassion, just this wonderful, wonderful tool that helps us soften our own hard edge that we can have with ourselves. What are the compassion traps? Some compassion traps too. The first is something that we've talked about. It's this belief that being compassionate means you should endure abuse of difficult people, right? And I want to be totally clear, that's not what it means. Understanding what causes certain behavior doesn't mean that we should invite that behavior into our lives, right? I have some friends that are just so compassionate and so good at understanding why people act the way they do. And it keeps them in friendships or relationships for far too long because they're like, oh, I understand what it is. So, but it doesn't mean that person's ever going to be able to change necessarily, right? Like, you understand, and it makes it easier for you to you know, a little bit less painful to have had those experiences, but it doesn't mean you should invite it more of it in the future necessarily. Right? It's a kind of a case-by-case basis. Again, another trap is that there's this belief that I'm not a very good person if I don't feel compassion for someone, right? That hurt me. Again, this is confusing compassion with a feeling. No, it's an act, this act of seeking to understand what beliefs, wounds, pain cause somebody to act some way. And lastly, there's the trap that this belief that having compassion for your own behavior means that you'll continue to make the same mistake over and over again. And like I said, no. Understanding yourself, understanding why you did something makes it less likely that you repeat some mistake. All right, that's compassion. And let's end on forgiveness. Forgiveness, I'm ending here because it is probably the least understood of all the words that I said. And so I'm going to pose this question. It's a real question you can answer. What do we really mean when we say, I forgive you? I'll do the drink pause. What are we really saying? What are we really communicating? We almost never ask ourselves this question, right? What the heck does it mean? And especially this thing like, oh, I'll forgive, but I'll never forget. What does this mean? Anyone want to pose it?
I feel like sometimes, I think it depends on the situation, but I feel like sometimes someone could apologize for something, but you could still be extremely hurt over it.
Yeah.
And I think it's more like, okay, I forgive you for apologizing, but I don't know if like I'm actually forgiving your actions just to
Yeah.
maybe that's the I forgive but don't forget part.
Yeah. And even though, what is forgiving the action mean? Does it mean like you suddenly evaporate? Like all the bad feelings evaporate? Yeah? Kind of?
Like we can move on from this, but still you're expecting them not to do it again. It's like, let's move on from this,
Yeah.
like we're not forgetting your action, your behavior, but like learn from it.
Yeah, you better learn from this.
Yeah.
You better not make it happen again. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I feel like you kind of become like cautious, like how she said, like we're expecting you not to do it, but maybe something in the back of our minds is like, are they gonna do that? Are they gonna do it again?
Yeah. And a lot of times there's that feeling because the way we have conversations, we're not really having them so that we necessarily really, really understand each other, right? Like, why were you really so hurt by what I did? And, or why did you even do that thing? When those two things aren't addressed in communication and people just gloss over it with forgiveness, a lot of times, again, the root cause isn't dealt with. So, does anyone else have anything they want to add before I go on? Yeah?
Forgiving somebody helps when you can have a second chance. But the part
Yeah.
So it's gonna take time to like completely forget and like start
Yeah.
maybe trusting them again.
Yeah. So there's something really important what you said. So it's almost like you're giving somebody something, right? You're being magnanimous enough to like, despite what you did, I'm going to give you a second chance, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is part of what I think is really confusing about this word, right? So it's usually focused on a feeling, right? That this hurt suddenly not being there, right? Right? There's like this kind of implicit idea of I won't hold a grudge, I won't feel the pain anymore, or at least I'll do what I can to get rid of it. And it seems to often be about the other person, right? And that's really tricky for a couple reasons, because feelings don't magically evaporate, right? And we don't feel particularly magnanimous when we're hurt by somebody, right? So I'm offering this definition of forgiveness that I feel makes a lot more sense, which is forgiveness is a choice to accept the reality of someone's transgression or mistake, right? So it's a choice, again, an action, a verb, right? We're choosing that we're accepting this is something that happened and I'm not gonna live in resistance to that. It did happen, right? Make the space for the hurt that comes with it. So just like we talked about emotions last week, so cradling that hurt, it's a wound that needs some love, right? And choosing, this is the most important part, that we will no longer torture ourselves by reliving, replaying, and ruminating about that thing that happened over and over again, because that's what we do have control over, right? We have control over the story, the narrative that we keep telling ourselves. And what does mindfulness have to do with this? Mindfulness is the best tool that I know of. Meditation is the best tool that I know of to begin to become aware of when you're lost in that story, you're lost in replaying it, and you can slowly be like, I see you, I will let go and I will put my attention on something else that I care about more, right? Now notice this definition isn't about magically not feeling something anymore, right? It's about holding it and accepting what you're feeling, but not magically not feeling it, because that's impossible. Talk about more conflict, right? How much conflict do you have when you think I should be forgiving you, I should be able to forgive, but I still feel this pain, right? And the second thing is, it's not about the other person, right? You're not doing a favor to the other person. It's all for you to not relive this pain over and over again and keep reliving this for the rest of your life. So this whole I will forgive you, but I will never forget thing totally misses the point, right? Because the not forget part somehow implies I'm going to keep telling that story and ruminating about this forever and ever, maybe my whole life. And I'll smile and be like, oh, you get a second chance. Everything's cool, right? All right. So this is also a tall order. I don't want to pretend like, this is not incredibly difficult. I may or may not be going through something with a family member right now that I find very hard to forgive, even by my definition, right? But I work on it, I practice it, and it makes life better than it would be if not. So I don't want to make this sound easy, but I do want us to talk about how do we practice that, right? And I think the first step is compassion, right? So it means making that choice to understand what is that person's wounds, where are they hurting, what are they believing, what are they thinking, what kind of like weird thought form, where maybe did they get that? Did they get that from their parents, et cetera, right? That at least softens you enough up to be open enough to hold your own hurt, because you're just a little bit less obsessed with the anger, and then once you're softened, then you can make it part of your mindfulness practice, right? Okay. Part of that could be holding the hurt, like we talked about, asking it what it's needing. If at all possible, just making any changes or communicating something to somebody that's really, really important that needs to be said, you think, right? Or it could just be like making space and holding it for a while. And then the other part is, that's the emotional part. The other part is being mindful of those thoughts that come up that keep recurring and recurring and recurring and recurring. when they come up, you can do the thing where you zap it. You zap it. Oh, I see you, I see you, I see you. Thank you, George, which is the name I have in my mind. Right? So just, these are all part of this practice. And when we stop doing that, we stop the story, we stop pushing away the hurt, then we're not torturing ourselves anymore. It's a little less torture. And again, not for the other person, but just so you can have some peace in your heart. Now, this may or may not come along with, okay, I've reached a place where I can give you a second chance, right? But even that should be for you, right? Because I enjoyed this person in my life and I don't want to have the stress, right? It may also mean that you do sever the relationship, which leads me to my forgiveness traps. One of the biggest forgiveness traps is that you have to continue the relationship with the person that did the transgression, that made the mistake, right? Not necessarily the case. So I feel like I've overshared this entire course, but I'll just say that I have been estranged from my father for 10 years, for a whole decade of my life. Have I forgiven him based on the definition that I've said here, this choice to stop living in the story? 100%. 100%. I feel no pain. I'm not thinking about it all the time. It's not interfering with my life. It's not interfering with my relationships. But at the same time, what happened between us and my assessment of his ability to grow and change and take responsibility for what happened, I don't quite believe in it. So I make this choice to have a separation, which is totally healthy, it's totally healthy. But the forgiveness has been for me, right? I don't live in the hell of telling that story all the time to myself. There's another story that I have, which is maybe one of the most mind-blowing stories of my entire life. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard this story of Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel. No, it's bonkers. So Mary Johnson had a son, 17-year-old young man who was at a party, and this guy, O'Shea Johnson, got into a kerfuffle with her son and shot him, murdered him. O'Shea Israel went to prison. He was 17 at the time. It was like only a 20-year thing. The whole time, Mary Johnson, the mom, just lived with so much rage, so much anger, so much hurt. Obviously, everything that you'd feel about somebody killing your own son, right? And depression, all the things you'd expect with that. And one day, she's like, I am never getting past this unless I meet this guy, right? So she goes to prison and she meets the guy who murdered her son. He's now like a young man, obviously. He's like in his late 20s, early 30s. And she, without knowing that she's practicing compassion, she's like, why did you do this? How did you do this? What led you to do something like this, right? And she started to kind of understand his world and what that world was like with young men where image is everything and one thing leads to another and it escalates, and the wounds that this guy had, and she says goodbye and she meets him again, and they keep corresponding, and eventually he gets out of parole and she throws him his welcome home party, and he moves in next to her and she adopts him, and they call each other mom and son now, right? So powerful, hard to tell it without tearing up, because it's just like the most, huge example of forgiveness that I can possibly think. But they were actually able to keep a relationship, right? So I think it's always possible, but here's one thing. If you're going to keep a relationship like that, the one condition is that both people have to be growing, right? They have to be both. So you can't have that relationship unless both people are committed to seeing what led to the thing, or just the one person really. And so that's a trap. Don't think you always need to continue a relationship with the person that you're forgiving, but if it feels right, give it a shot. And lastly, something we've mentioned before, if you forgive yourself, it does not mean that you're giving yourself permission to make the same mistake over and over again. In fact, forgiving yourself, again, means that you have taken steps to understand why you behave the way you did, and will likely mean that you'll do better next time. And you'll be a little bit less grumpy, sad, hurt, angry, curmudgeonly. And that never hurts. That always makes us better people. Okay, that went a little longer than I was expecting it to. And I don't think we have time to practice the meditation that I have. I feel like we would just be getting into it. So I'll give you guys a choice. Either we can give it a shot and it might go a little bit over, or we could just open it up to question period now. What's that? Questions, yeah. Do you have a question? No? Okay. You're just like, I've been sitting here for 50 minutes.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
Because of my staying.
Yeah. Sisters want to battle it out. Okay, I'll try. I will try to make it a shorter one. But it's basically just a meditation in practicing exactly this kind of forgiveness that we have just talked about. So take a second to just think of some sort of conflict that's arisen in your life that's again, like a 4 or a 5, and not like a 9 or a 10. Like, we're practicing here. We don't want to just amp up, right? to like, right? Let me forgive the guy who tried to shoot me, right? We're not trying to do that, right? But something like some conflict that was irritating, frustrating, but not overwhelmingly so. Okay? And as we usually start, get in a posture that feels alert, but also strong and dignified. And alert. And bringing your attention to your body breathing. Again, any time that we turn our attention to things that can be challenging, it's nice to have a nice steady foundation. Get centered, get concentrated, but just watching your body breathe. Notice your mind slipping away. Just very gently return your attention to your breath. Wherever you feel it strongest. Could be your nostrils. Could be your chest, could be your stomach. Just notice wherever you feel you're breathing strongest. attention to this memory of this conflict that you had with somebody. Just noticing what comes up when you turn your attention there. Noticing the feelings that arise. It could be anger, it could be hurt, frustration, it could be fear. Notice where you feel it in the body. Just kind of hold it. Let it know it's okay to be there. And that you're going to do something to take care of it right now, to help it out by understanding why you feel this way, why what happened happened. So now that those feelings are held and attended to, take a moment to look at the other person that was involved in this conflict. You might get a little burst of more feeling when you turn your attention there. Just kind of pose the question, what were you believing? What were you thinking that led to this? What made you do that thing? What were you feeling? Afraid? Was this person scared? Were they hurt in their own way? What could have happened in the past that led to this moment? Are there any wounds that might be there? Is this person buying some thought or stuck on some belief? Is there anything there to understand? Remind yourself that this person, whatever they did, they hurt too, they suffer too. Usually in one way or another, when they do something like that, they're acting out of that own pain. Now Now turn your attention back to yourself and ask yourself, how would it feel if I were to let go of this story I'm telling myself in my head over and over again about what happened? What if I spent a little bit just less time there in my head? Would I be lighter? Would I feel more peaceful? Would I feel more free? And if it feels right, making a commitment to notice when you start replaying that scene in your head. Notice the judgments that come and the stories that you tell. Giving yourself permission to let them go when they come up. Not for the other person, but for you. When you're ready, just turn your attention back to your breath. Watching your body breathe. How do you feel?